The ice in her crystal glass clinked. It was a sharp, isolated sound that cut right through the low mechanical hum of the pool filter. The California coast air was finally starting to cool down, the sunset leaving behind a bruised purple sky over the Pacific, but the ambient heat still radiated upward from the travertine patio. I stood on the outside of the outdoor marble counter, my hands resting flat and motionless against the cool stone. My dark suit jacket felt heavy across my shoulders, a restrictive layer I hadn't bothered to take off since leaving my firm's downtown office. Madeline Gardner leaned forward. The white silk of her off-the-shoulder dress caught the warm amber light from the string bolts overhead. The hem of the dress was short, riding up just enough against the edge of the bar stool to reveal the delicate lace banding of a stocking against her thigh. I kept my gaze anchored to the rim of her glass. I did not look lower. I did not look higher. I simply watched the condensation gather and drip down the faceted crystal. "Do you always make women this curious?" she asked. Her voice was a low vibration, barely louder than the coastal breeze rustling the palm fronds. It wasn't a flirtation, not really. I had known Madeline for 10 years, ever since her son Bentley became my roommate in college. Back then, she was the untouchable, elegant matriarch who occasionally paid for our dinners. Now, the dynamic had fractured. The elegance was still there, polished to a high sheen, but the foundation beneath it was cracking. I could see it in the slight tremor of her fingers. I could hear it in the careful, measured way she exhaled. "I make people nervous, Madeline," I said, keeping my volume low, my tone strictly factual. "It's the nature of my job. Forensic accountants aren't usually invited to pool parties unless someone is hiding something, or someone is terrified of what's about to be found." She set the glass down. The playful curiosity in her eyes vanished, replaced instantly by a profound, exhaustion-laden gravity. "I'm not hiding anything, Luca, but I am terrified." I finally looked up from the glass, meeting her eyes. They were a pale, striking green, framed by the soft, golden-brown waves of her hair. The silence between us stretched, heavy and expectant. The loud, chaotic noise of the coast, the sports cars on the Pacific Coast Highway, the superficial chatter of my daily corporate clients, seemed to mute itself. I waited. In my line of work, silence was a tool. If you stayed quiet long enough, people filled the space with the truth. "Arthur Vance," she said quietly. The name hung in the air like a bad scent. Arthur was her ex-husband's former business partner. "He sent a courier to the gallery today. A notice of default. He's claiming a $2.5 million collateral call on the estate. He says the debt transferred to me in the divorce decree." I frowned, the analytical part of my brain immediately cataloging the variables. "Did it?" "My lawyers said the separation agreement was watertight," she whispered, twisting the thin silver ring on her right hand. "But Arthur says he has a secondary ledger. He gave me until the end of next month to liquidate the gallery and hand over the keys, or he initiates a public seizure. He's going to ruin my reputation, Luca. He's going to make it look like I embezzled from my own family." This was the collision. The moment the abstract problem became a concrete set of data points. She was asking for a favor that required my specific, highly specialized skill. She wasn't asking for comfort. She was asking for a shield. "Where are the files?" I asked. The sudden shift in my tone, from conversational to procedural, made her blink. "They're in my office. 4 boxes. My attorney told me to just settle. He said fighting Arthur in court would take years and destroy the gallery's public image." "Your attorney is a litigator," I replied smoothly, stepping away from the marble counter to put 3 feet of distance between us. "Litigators see the world in terms of arguments. I see the world in terms of math. Math doesn't argue. It just proves." I checked my watch. "Show me the boxes." She led me inside the massive, quiet house. The air conditioning was a sharp contrast to the humid evening outside. We walked down the long, vaulted hallway to her private study. The room smelled of old paper, binding glue, and a faint hint of the vanilla perfume she wore. Stacked against the far wall were 4 heavy banker's boxes, their lids slightly askew. "I'll need to formally onboard you as a client," I said, unbuttoning my suit jacket and draping it carefully over the back of a leather armchair. I rolled up my sleeves to the elbows. My standard retainer fee, a nominal amount on paper just to establish attorney-client privilege through my firm's legal arm. "Arthur will try to subpoena my findings. The contract protects you." "I can pay your full rate, Luca," she said, her chin lifting slightly. Pride. It was a good look on her, but an unnecessary defense mechanism with me. "I know you can," I said quietly. "But right now, we need a legally binding wall between you and Arthur. I will draw up the engagement letter tonight." I walked over to the first box and lifted the lid. Inside were hundreds of bank statements, tax returns, and K-1 schedules. "I'll start with the 2021 fiscal year. That's when Arthur and your ex restructured the holding company." Madeline stood in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. "How do you know that?" "I read the Financial Times, Madeline, and I pay attention." I pulled out a stack of ledgers and set them on the heavy oak desk. "You should get some sleep." "I can't sleep," she admitted, her voice dropping an octave. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the gallery doors locked. I see 30 years of my work dismantled because of a technicality I didn't even know existed." I paused. I didn't offer a platitude. I didn't tell her it was going to be okay because I hadn't verified the numbers yet. Instead, I pulled out my laptop, booted it up, and opened a blank, encrypted spreadsheet. "Then stay," I said simply. "Sit on the couch, read a book, but the anxiety stops at the door. From this moment on, the numbers are my problem." She looked at me, a slow, grounding relief washing over her features. It wasn't the relief of being saved. It was the relief of not having to carry the weight alone. She walked over to the velvet sofa in the corner, pulled a throw blanket over her legs, and opened a novel. I turned my attention to the screen. The silence in the room shifted from tense to structural. It was a quiet room, a fortress. By the third night, the routine had solidified into a precise, unspoken rhythm. I arrived at the estate at 7 in the evening after finishing my primary casework at the firm. I walked directly into the study. Madeline would already be there, sitting on the sofa or at the drafting table, reviewing her gallery's artist submissions. There was always a glass of ice water and a cup of black coffee waiting on the corner of the oak desk. I was currently deep into the 2022 general ledger. The glow of the monitor was the brightest light in the room. I was tracking a specific anomaly, a recurring disbursement of $40,000 every quarter funneled through an LLC registered in Delaware. "You're frowning," Madeline said softly. I stopped typing and looked up. She was watching me from the sofa, her reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. "I don't frown," I corrected mildly. "I calibrate." "You were calibrating aggressively then," she noted, setting her tablet down. "What did you find?" "Arthur claimed the $2.5 million collateral was tied to the primary gallery mortgage, correct?" I asked, scanning the spreadsheet rows I had just color-coded. "Yes, he said when the commercial real estate market dipped, my ex-husband pledged my gallery as secondary backing for their joint venture. Arthur says the venture failed, so he's calling the note." I shook my head slowly. "The venture didn't fail, Madeline. It was deliberately starved." I turned the laptop screen toward her. She stood up and walked over, standing just behind my left shoulder. I could feel the ambient warmth of her proximity, a sudden spike in the atmosphere that I immediately forced myself to ignore. I kept my hands flat on the desk, my posture rigid. "Look at this column," I said, pointing with a pen. This is the operating account for their joint venture.
Every quarter, just before the debt service payment was due, $40,000 was wired to a Delaware LLC named Apex Holdings. It created an artificial cash flow shortage. The venture defaulted on its primary loan because Arthur was draining it to Apex. Madeline leaned closer to the screen. Who owns Apex Holdings? I ran the tax ID through a skip trace database this afternoon, I said, my voice dropping into its flattest, most professional register. Apex Holdings is wholly owned by Arthur Vance. He manufactured the default to trigger the collateral clause. He doesn't just want his money back. He wants the gallery. She inhaled sharply, stepping back from the desk as if the laptop itself had burned her. That's fraud. It's a breach of fiduciary duty at minimum, I agreed, closing the laptop lid with a soft click. But it's layered well. If you had gone to a standard litigator, they would have spent months arguing the interpretation of the divorce decree. They never would have audited the Delaware shell. Madeline raised a hand to her temple, rubbing the skin there in a tight circle. It was a nervous habit I had noticed on day one. He's going to deny it. He's going to say those were legitimate consulting fees. He has a team of corporate lawyers, Luca. If we accuse him of this, he won't just take the gallery. He'll drag my name through the press. He'll say, I'm a bitter ex-wife inventing conspiracies to avoid my debts. The fear in her eyes was real, rooted in the deep-seated wound of public scandal. Her ex-husband's affairs had already made her fodder for the local coastal gossip mill. She couldn't survive another public humiliation. I stood up from the desk. I wanted, with a sudden, intense gravity, to reach out and pull her hands away from her face. I wanted to physically shield her from the panic. Instead, I shoved both of my hands deep into my trouser pockets and stepped back, giving her space. Restraint was the only currency that mattered right now. He won't deny it, I said, my voice steady, anchoring the room, because we aren't going to accuse him of anything. She looked up confused. I don't understand. Accusations are for people who don't have proof, I explained calmly. I don't argue with people like Arthur. I'm going to compile a complete forensic trace of the wire transfers. I'm going to cross-reference them with the K-1 tax filings. When we are finished, we will have a mathematically undeniable document. He won't have the luxury of a PR spin. Luca, she let out a shaky exhale. The tension in her shoulders dropped just a fraction. Thank you. I know this is taking up all your free time. Bentley mentioned you haven't been answering his calls. Bentley thinks a financial crisis can be solved by playing golf, I said dryly. I'll call him when the audit is done. You're a good friend to him, she said softly. And to me. I'm just doing my job, Madeline. It was a lie, of course. I hadn't taken a dime of her money. I was here because the thought of her losing her life's work to a predator made my chest tight with a cold, absolute anger. But she didn't need my anger. She needed my competence. Over the next 2 weeks, the California coastal weather turned gray and unseasonably cold. Inside the study, the domestic anchors deepened. I memorized her habits without trying. She liked her coffee at exactly 8 o'clock, black. When she was stressed, she twisted her silver ring. When she found an artist she loved, she would hum a tuneless, quiet melody while drafting the contract. I found myself anticipating these small moments, calibrating my own actions to support them. If the room felt too cold, I adjusted the thermostat before she had to reach for her sweater. If her water glass was empty, I quietly replaced it with a full one while she was on a call. I never announced these actions. They were simply a transfer of stability. Then came day 12. I was at my firm in Los Angeles, sitting in a glass-walled conference room when my personal cell phone vibrated on the table. It was Madeline. I excused myself from the meeting and stepped into the quiet corridor. Luca? Her voice was tight, breathless. I'm at the gallery. I just tried to run payroll for my staff. The transaction was declined. I stopped walking.
declined by the processing software or the bank? The bank, she said, panic bleeding through the word. I called the branch manager. He said there's a hard freeze on all my commercial and personal accounts. Arthur filed a preliminary injunction this morning claiming I was a flight risk with the collateral assets. They locked everything. I can't pay my staff. I can't pay the electricity. The midpoint twist. Arthur had moved early, bypassing the standard 30-day notice to execute a shock and awe tactic. He was trying to suffocate her logistics before she could mount a defense. Listen to me, I said, my voice dropping into its lowest, most authoritative register. Do not panic. Do not call Arthur. Do not call the bank manager back. Luca, my staff, I will handle the payroll, I cut in smoothly. I have a contingency fund for emergency client disbursements. I will wire the payroll amount directly to your processing vendor within the hour. Your staff will be paid on time. They won't even know there was a hiccup. There was a sudden, profound silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her shaky exhale. You can't do that. That's your money. It's an advance on the gallery's future receivables, I lied effortlessly, framing it as a business transaction to protect her pride. It is entirely standard. Now I need you to go to your office, lock the door, and send me the PDF of the injunction notice Arthur's lawyers filed. I am leaving my office now. I will be at your house in 40 minutes. Okay, she whispered. The tremor in her voice was gone, replaced by a fragile trust. Okay, I'll send it. I hung up. I didn't return to the conference room. I walked straight to my desk, initiated the wire transfer to her payroll vendor from my personal accounts, and then took the elevator down to the parking garage. When I arrived at her estate, the sky was pouring thick, relentless rain. I walked into the study to find Madeline standing by the window, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked small, isolated against the massive panes of glass. I didn't speak. I walked to the desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the injunction notice she had emailed me. I read the legal clauses rapidly, my eyes scanning the dense text for the specific leverage points. Arthur's lawyers had filed an ex parte motion based on the assertion that she was attempting to liquidate gallery art and move the cash offshore. It was a complete fabrication, but it was enough to freeze an account pending a hearing. He lied, Madeline said, turning away from the window. He told the judge I was trying to sell the Chagall piece under the table. I haven't even had the Chagall appraised in 2 years. I know, I said. I'm pulling the gallery's inventory logs and security camera timestamps right now. We will prove the Chagall hasn't moved from the vault. She walked over to the desk, stopping just inches from my chair. It doesn't matter, Luca. The freeze is already active. If I can't buy art, if I can't host the gala next week, the gallery is dead. He doesn't need to win in court. He just needs to freeze me out long enough that I go bankrupt. The despair in her voice was a physical weight in the room. I stopped typing. I looked up at her. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, her composure finally fracturing under the relentless pressure of the system. I stood up. The proximity between us was suddenly intense. I could smell the rain on her clothes, the faint trace of vanilla. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. The urge to reach out, to pull her against my chest and shield her from the chaos was a staggering, gravitational pull. But I knew that if I touched her now, in a moment of panic and vulnerability, it would be an exploitation of the power dynamic. It would be a violation of the safe room I had built for her. Instead, I reached out and carefully, deliberately, placed my hand flat against the oak desk, anchoring myself. I looked directly into her eyes. Madeline, look at me. She blinked, focusing on my face. Arthur expects you to fold, I said, my voice steady, an iron rod in the center of the storm. He expects you to call him tomorrow, desperate and embarrassed, and sign over the deed to the gallery just to unfreeze your life. That is his entire strategy. He relies on panic. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We are going to let him think he won," I said, "for exactly 48 hours. We let the freeze sit. We do not respond to his lawyers. While he is waiting for you to surrender, I am going to finalize the Delaware LLC audit. Then, we are going to invite him to a meeting." "A meeting?" "Yes, at his bank, with his senior lending officer present." I pulled a flash drive from my pocket and set it on the desk between us. "He weaponized the financial system against you. We are going to dismantle his credibility in front of the people who hold his own debt. I just need you to trust me." She looked at the flash drive, then back up at my face. The panic in her eyes slowly dissolved, replaced by a quiet, determined clarity. The transfer of stability was complete. "I trust you," she said. It was a simple sentence, but the weight of it felt absolute. 2 days later, the California sun was blindingly bright as we walked into the glass and steel lobby of Pacific Standard Bank in Century City. Madeline walked beside me, wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit. Her posture was flawless. She didn't look like a woman whose bank accounts were frozen. She looked like an executive arriving to close an acquisition. I carried a single, slim black leather folio. We were escorted to a high-floor boardroom. Sitting at the long mahogany table was Arthur Vance. He wore a smug, relaxed smile, leaning back in his chair with a coffee cup in hand. Next to him sat his attorney, and at the head of the table was Marcus Sterling, the senior vice president of commercial lending for the bank. "Madeline," Arthur said smoothly, not bothering to stand, "I'm glad you decided to be reasonable. I have the settlement papers right here. You sign over the gallery deed, I lift the freeze, and you walk away clean." Madeline didn't look at the papers. She didn't even look at Arthur. She pulled out a chair, sat down gracefully, and placed her hands flat on the table. "I'm not here to sign your settlement, Arthur. I am here to clarify a misunderstanding regarding my accounts." Arthur's smile thinned. He finally noticed me standing behind her. "And who is this? Your new divorce attorney?" "I am Luca Hansen," I said, taking the seat next to Madeline. I placed the black folio on the table. "I am a forensic accountant representing Ms. Gardner. Mr. Sterling, thank you for allowing us to schedule this meeting." The bank vice president nodded cautiously. "Ms. Gardner is a long-standing client, Mr. Hansen, but the injunction order was clear. The collateral default is legally actionable." "The collateral default is a fabrication," I said. The room went dead silent. I kept my volume low, forcing them all to lean in to hear me. I opened the folio and slid a thick, bound document across the polished wood toward the bank vice president. "This is a certified forensic audit of the joint venture operating account for the past 3 fiscal years. Arthur's lawyer immediately reached for the document. "You have no right to audit." "I have every right," I interrupted, my voice perfectly level. The venture was co-signed by my client's former spouse during their marriage, making the ledgers accessible under the discovery clause of the divorce decree. "Mr. Sterling, if you turn to page 14, you will see a detailed trace of quarterly wire transfers." The vice president opened the binder. $40,000, he muttered, adjusting his glasses. "Wired to Apex Holdings, LLC. A Delaware shell company," I confirmed, "wholly owned by Arthur Vance." Arthur sat forward, his smugness evaporating into sudden, sharp hostility. "Those were legitimate consulting fees for market analysis." "No, they were not," Madeline said. It was her moment of power, and she took it with chilling precision.
She pulled a single sheet of paper from her own purse and slid it across the table.
This is the corporate registration for Apex Holdings. And this, she laid down a second paper, is an email from the consulting firm you supposedly hired confirming they have never done business with Apex Holdings. You drained the operating account, Arthur. You starved your own venture to force a default so you could claim my gallery. The bank vice president stared at the papers, his face draining of color. Mr. Vance, is this true? It's a manipulative interpretation of standard accounting practices, Arthur snapped, his voice rising in volume. I didn't raise mine. I simply tapped a finger against the open binder. It is a documented breach of fiduciary duty and a fraudulent conveyance, Mr. Sterling. Furthermore, because Arthur Vance used the Pacific Standard Bank routing system to execute these transfers, this bank is now inadvertently hosting fraudulent transactions. My firm has prepared a formal report for the SEC and the State Regulatory Board. The threat was implicit, massive, and entirely grounded in reality. The bank would face massive fines if they were caught holding fraudulent accounts. However, I continued smoothly, my client is not interested in a lengthy regulatory investigation. She simply wants her accounts unfrozen, the injunction withdrawn, and the collateral claim permanently voided. The vice president looked at Arthur. His expression was no longer cautious. It was lethal. Mr. Vance, you will withdraw the injunction immediately. You will sign a release of the collateral claim on Ms. Gardner's gallery before you leave this room. If you do not, Pacific Standard will freeze every single one of your corporate accounts pending an internal fraud review. Arthur stared at the banker, then at me. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He knew he was beaten. The leverage was gone, dismantled by math and paper. He snatched a pen from the table, signed the release forms his lawyer hastily pushed toward him, and threw the pen down. You're making a mistake, Madeline, Arthur hissed, standing up. The only mistake I made, Madeline said, her voice steady and clear, was trusting you in the first place. Goodbye, Arthur. They left the room. The vice president sighed, rubbing his temples. Ms. Gardner, the freeze on your accounts will be lifted within the hour. I apologize for the distress this has caused. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, she said politely. We walked out of the bank and into the bright California afternoon. The adrenaline of the confrontation was slowly fading, leaving behind a quiet, profound stillness. We walked to my car in silence. I unlocked the doors, but neither of us got in. Madeline leaned against the passenger side door, looking up at the sky. It's over, she whispered. It's over, I confirmed. The signed release is legally binding. The gallery is yours. The debt is gone. She turned to look at me. The fear and exhaustion that had shadowed her face for the past month were completely erased. She looked vibrant, powerful, and incredibly beautiful. I don't know how to repay you, Luca, she said softly. You saved my life. I put my hands in my pockets, gripping the fabric to keep them steady. You don't owe me anything, Madeline. I did my job. No, she corrected, taking a step closer to me. The proximity was deliberate. You did more than your job. You stood between me and a disaster, and you didn't ask for anything in return. She reached out, her fingers gently touching the lapel of my suit jacket. It was a functional touch, a grounding connection, but the sudden quiet that settled over my mind was absolute. The chaotic noise of the world vanished. I didn't want anything, I said, my voice thick. It was the hardest, honest answer I could give. Except to make sure you were safe. She smiled, a small, genuine expression that reached her eyes. I am safe. Because of you.
2 weeks later, the coastal weather had returned to its standard sunny perfection. I walked into Madeline's gallery on a Tuesday afternoon. The space was bright, filled with natural light and the low murmur of patrons admiring the new exhibition. Madeline was standing near the front desk, signing a delivery manifest. She looked up when the door chimed. Her face lit up. She handed the clipboard to her assistant and walked over to me. "You're early," she said. "I finished my afternoon audits," I replied. I reached into my inside jacket pocket and pulled out a small, heavy envelope. I handed it to her. She opened it. Inside were the final, certified closure documents for the Delaware LLC audit, officially terminating Arthur's legal standing. But underneath the documents was a second item, a small, brass key. She looked at the key, then up at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "What is this?" "It's the key to my firm's private archiving vault," I said quietly. "I moved all of your gallery's financial master files there. They are under my personal security code. No one can ever access them without your direct written consent, witnessed by me." It was a practical commitment, a shared plan. It was a boundary set in brass and protocol, a promise that I would remain the shield between her and the system, not just for a month, but permanently. Madeline looked at the key in her palm. Her hand wasn't shaking anymore. She looked up and, without a word, she stepped into my space. She placed her hands flat against my chest, right over my heart, and leaned in. The kiss was not an exploration. It was a destination. It was the moment the fighting stopped. It felt heavy, grounding, and absolute. A promise sealed without words. When she pulled back, she kept her hands on my chest, her eyes locked on mine. "Thank you," she whispered. "Always," I replied. You know that feeling when the floor drops out from under you? When the systems that are supposed to protect you suddenly become the weapons used against you? I learned something during those long nights reviewing ledgers in Madeline's study. I learned that true victory isn't about destroying your enemy with chaos. It's about sleeping with a clear conscience. Winning the wrong way is actually losing. Real strength, real love, is about consistency. It's about showing up with the right tools, doing the quiet, unglamorous work, and building a foundation so solid that no one can ever shake it again. Healthy love doesn't create the storm. It builds the shelter. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.